Hello, everybody, and welcome to Virtual TrekCon 4 with Sirach Lofton the First.
Hello.
Today, we are joined by VFX artist, Mr. Matt Boardman. How are you, Matt?
Good. Glad to be here with you guys.
All right. First and foremost, before we even get into it, no pressure. What's your favorite Star Trek series ever?
Oh, gosh. It's really hard for me to just decide between Deep Space Nine and Next Gen. Like, it's like I kind of love both of them equally, but in some ways, Deep Space Nine kind of edges Next Gen a little bit. But I don't know. It's always tough. But those two are neck and neck for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So the first thing I just kind of wanted to get into, just like the very first thing before we even, we're going to interview you, I noticed that you have done VFX, you've worked on Star Trek Discovery, and you've worked on the Orville.
Yes.
Which seem like such contrasting styles and color palettes. Like you have the Orville with the bright blues and the electric blues and reds that are very reminiscent of the Next Generation. Basically, they just got the Next Generation, added some orange, and you got the Orville, and some green maybe. Whereas Discovery is dark. It's a lot of black. It's a lot of gray. There's a little bit of gold and red and copper that kind of pops out of it. Those are the color palettes I remember when I'm looking back at these shows. Can you just get into the differences, or whether they kind of prep you for this and say, focus on this, focus on that, or how does that process work?
Well, usually in the showrunners and other people higher up the chain decide this is the kind of look that we're going to go for with this series. As far as the Orville, the approach was very, very similar to the way that they did visual effects on Star Trek. We were always told it was that 3-point lighting system that they used on Voyager. So it was always, it's a light that's kind of, that gives you that kind of that glint off the holes of the ship. It's usually a light pointing at the camera, and then you got some fill lights in to kind of, that they fill in so it's not completely black around the ship. So yeah, that the directive on that is we want it to be lit like things were lit in Voyager. For Discovery, at the time that I was on the show, it was still kind of up in the air as to what the overall look of the show would be and what the color schemes were. So by the time we were let go from the show, it was they were still kind of developing that look, but it was kind of like they wanted to go in a certain direction. Like at the time, Brian Fuller described it as he wanted this to be like Game of Thrones in space. And so,
right. Mm-hmm.
and you can kind of see it in the over, in the finished product in the way that they colored. It's very, it's kind of, it shares a similar color palette to Game of Thrones, especially in the darker scenes, like the last season with the attack on Winterfell and everything like that.
Mm-hmm.
So we went from Wagon Train to Game of Thrones.
Right. Exactly.
Wow.
So Matt, when you're doing your visual, when you're watching Deep Space Nine and Next Generation, and you're looking at the visual effects there, what are some of the things that you see that you like? And what are some of the things that you see that are kind of things that are glaringly need improvement?
Well, I'm always impressed at, because my visual effects experience has been everything digital. And so to see everything done as practical models, there's a lot of stuff that I'm very impressed in how they do it. Like, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've watched, like, and they're doing stuff on their consoles, and all of a sudden I see the console moving. Like, why do I not remember that had a graphic that actually moved and whatever? I think that they did such a great job with those models, and I've had the opportunity to work with some of those people who did those model shoots, and
Mhm.
and what's great about it is that that same process that they use to film the practical models, we used and were implemented in our digital shooting of it. So, shooting they'll take the model and they'll have it on a motion control rig, um, or the camera on a motion control rig, and they'll do several passes of it. So they'll do one with like a key light on it, and then they'll do some fill lights, and then they'll turn off all the lights, and it'll just be like the glowing the blue glow of the nacelles, and they'll do that pass, and then they take it all together, and they would or they would composite it all together. And we do that same process with our digital visual effects. And what's great about it is that it gives you so much more control over the final look of it, because you could be like, well, I don't think that that blue glow is bright enough, so then we can adjust it, make it brighter, or do little things like that. So I thought that was such a great thing. And those models, I mean, man, the model team there, Greg Jean and those guys, they just, and that Deep Space Nine model, man, I would love someday to be able to see that thing, because
Mm,
that's just such a cool model.
it's huge.
And
I've
yeah,
never seen the model.
yeah, I would love to, because it's just, I'm always impressed. It's always funny because it's like you hide a lot of sins in the way that you don't see certain paint strokes and whatever, because of the way that it's shot.
Hmm.
It's in motion and stuff like that. But I'm always impressed at the level of detail that are in those models, and I think that's just a tribute to the people who worked on them, and the love and care that they put into making sure that what they were putting out there was the best quality, because they loved the show itself. Um, in terms of effects that I always thought were a little, I don't know, I'm trying to think if there's anything that I thought was like, oh man, that didn't work so well. I can't even think on Deep Space Nine if there really was any. I think that they always came to the table with really, really just well planned out sequences. They knew what they wanted to do, uh, and they found ways to make it look good.
Yeah.
They use so many practical models too, so many practical effects, which made it, I guess, a little bit easier, because everybody says, oh, we'll fix it in post. But you don't have to fix it in post if you just make everything look good, like to the best of your ability with the practical
Mhm.
things. And it seemed like they did such a great job with all of that ahead of time. That's what it seems like from the untrained eye, at least. But Matt, I kind of want to know, going back a little bit, when did you first start watching Star Trek? What was your impression? What made you? Because clearly you've done a lot in Star Trek. More on that in a minute. But his history with Sirach and myself actually goes back quite a few years, apparently. Um, but where did this Star Trek bug start, and where did the VFX bug start? Did your love for Star Trek get you into visual effects? Did your love for visual effects get you into Star Trek, or were they two parallel lines that just eventually ended up meeting?
I would say it was that love of Star Trek that got me into visual effects. Yeah, I started out. I mean, my first Star Trek was actually the animated series.
There he is. Finally, we got one. I love it. That's so cool.
So, like when I was a kid growing up in the '80s, it was obviously in reruns at that point, and Nickelodeon used to have it, and we'd be watching it. But I was like too young to really understand what I was watching, but just enough to know that I liked it. I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. Like the episode that always sticks out. I forget the name of it right now, but it was when the people, like, they basically, it was like the Benjamin Button people, where they as they got older they got younger,
Mhm.
and so I didn't really understand what I was watching. I was a Star Wars fan at the time,
Similar
and
to the Voyager episode Innocence, if I remember correctly, right?
so yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. And so it wasn't until Next Gen was on TV, and we happened to be down visiting my grandparents, and my uncle, who isn't much older than me, was watching it, and the episode was Skin of Evil. And so so
Great
that was my
start.
first episode of Next Generation. Yeah. And so I was like, and I just remember being like, oh my gosh, what is this? Like, I just thought that was so cool. And I think I was like 8 at the time. I was like, oh wow, this is cool. And then the next episode I caught was Conspiracy, and there's, you know, something that happens in that episode that I was
You
just like,
just like the episodes that are killing people is the key here.
exactly. I was like, more death and destruction, please. Um, but so I after that I didn't see it again until much later. I think they were in the 5th season by the time I came back to it. But then I would just start. I was like, oh yeah, I remember this show. I really liked it. And then I would just start watching it more and more. And the more that I watched it, I was like, oh, this is great. And they used to show reruns on USA, and so I went back and I started watching this stuff, and I was like, oh my gosh, I love this show. And then it became a very torrid affair. Um, you know, then I'm buying books. I'm that nerdy kid that's like, you know, I bought the Star Trek encyclopedia and I'm drawing the Enterprise. I'm like tracing over it. I'm like, okay, so this is how we draw the side profile of all the Enterprises and everything. So yeah, that led to kind of an interest in wanting to do more visually with Star
Mm-hmm.
Trek.
Mm-hmm.
So is that makes you like, so your talent and skill started with art, right? There were artistry and just drawing, kind
Yeah,
of moved its way up from there.
yeah. I mean, look, if I'm being totally honest, I couldn't draw to save my life. You know, uh, there's so many more talented people out there. I mean, I guess I could draw to save my life, but it's like it's very rudimentary. You know, it's enough to get the point across. But I always like my dad introduced me into model building, and that was always kind of a fun thing. I was always so horrible at it because it was like, I see people who do these models today, and I never had the tools like the airbrush and everything. And I was always that kid that like for example, I would put together a model of like an F-16, and
Mm.
that glue is so toxic, and I would get it on my fingers, and then I would touch the clear windshield, and then it would just be like it would turn it into this like frosted glass look, and like every time I'm like, oh man, there was always thumbprints and fingerprints all over the canopy. It was so bad. I was so awful at it. But the really cool thing is when someone introduced me to a 3D modeling program, I was like, this is so cool. Like, now I have the ability to make my own models without
Mm.
the mess of the glue. You know, I wasn't getting
Without the
glue on
thumbprints.
exactly without my signature thumbprint on the model. Oh, who made this one? Oh, that must be Boardman because it's got his thumb all over it. But yeah, it was so cool because you know, I think that love of art and then the love of model building kind of, it was like, oh, this is like the best of both worlds come together. And I don't have to know how to draw because it handles all the perspective lines and everything like that for me.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Do you remember
This
who that was that did that? Who introduced you to the 3D
His name
model
is
program?
yeah, well, his name is Davros Mandrake. He actually lives in the UK. So
that guy,
um
that's a name straight out of Game of Thrones right there.
Yeah,
right.
that's a great name.
He's also the guy that
That's great.
introduced me to the term that's pants. When when something doesn't go well, oh, that's pants. Um, I think even England would know that one.
What is
Um,
where's I don't know, where does that come from? What I mean, to me, I'm just like, on our videos, you know, I would say some, you know, pants are bad just because like nobody sees it. So you can wear pants, you can wear shorts, you can wear bathing suits. So like that's how I'm picturing it, but I'm sure it doesn't come from anything like that because this was well before
Yeah.
that. What does that even mean?
I have no idea. I don't know what the origins of that was. It was just enough. I learned enough just to know that when he said something was pants, that it wasn't good, and I was like, oh, all right, okay, well, we'll try something.
That's
Try something
pants.
else.
That's pants.
I
Got it.
mean, I've always
Europeans
been of
don't
the
like
opinion
pants.
that yeah, exactly. I always thought pants beats no pants any day, but I don't know. It's just
Yeah.
no, I don't know if you guys remember this, but back when this was like the late '90s, and it was like, you know, AOL was getting its big start and the big push there, and they used to have those like those boards on there, and like there was a Star Trek board that like Ron Moore would answer people's questions that I participated in. And I happened to stumble upon these groups that would play. It was a game. It was a role playing game. It was a email role playing game where you would create a character and you would write from your character's perspective. And they had like ships of people. They were just all together, and everybody would write from their character's perspective. And then you'd send out this mass
It's
email
fun.
to all the people on the ship. Yeah, it was so cool. And we from there we started going into like, oh, we started building our own websites, and then we would start doing graphics for our episode titles. And I had a lot of fun building that stuff in Photoshop. And then this guy one day just said, well, if you like doing that, you should check this out. And so he sent me a copy of 3D Studio Max, and I started seeing all these models that people built, and you just bring them in, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. Like, it just made sense to my brain. And so I started doing that more and more until one day I finally was like, I wonder, that this being just completely out of, not even being in that my orbit, but I was like, I wonder if I could get somebody to pay me to do this. And so
Find what you love to do and find a way to get paid doing it,
right.
right?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah,
Mhm.
so I taught myself how to do the program, and then eventually started going to school for it.
Now, something I teased earlier was that, Matt, you've actually done visual effects work on Renegades and Star Trek Renegades, these independent productions, and all the way back to Sirach might remember it with his half Vulcan ears as I believe it was Nichelle Nichols' son of Gods and Men. Uh, so when you were doing that, did you ever think one of these days I'm going to be hanging out with that dude with the half Vulcan ears? Or like, I mean, it just sounds like such a fun way to get started into the business. How did that transpire? Who brought you in?
Oh man, yeah, that was a while ago. So right at the time that they canceled Enterprise,
Mhm.
there I don't know if you guys remember, there was kind of a big push of people like trying to see if they could petition the studio to go for another season. And in the process of that, kind of started having people like, well, why don't we do our own little like fan films and stuff like that? And so I happened to get involved with a group of people who were doing that, and one of them uh, actually went on to work on Of Gods and Men. And so she yeah, they were well into production, but she was like, well, we kind of need some help. Maybe you can help these guys render a few things here and there. And so that's how I got started on that. She just brought me in, and I look back at there's a few shots that I did for them, and I look back at them now, and I'm like, oh, please, nobody watch that ever again. They were so bad. But I was still very new in my understanding of how things worked.
Hmm. Do you remember who that lady is? You want to give her a shout out?
Well, her name is Sarah Char. She is
Yeah, sure.
she's unfortunately, we are not in contact anymore.
hmm hmm Yeah, I've heard of her. We know her. Um, well, I mean, what I didn't know
Wow.
was that it kind of opened the door for you to be working on a lot of these independent things. But you also worked on Battlestar Blood and Chrome, which had to have been, I know it's not fully Star Trek related, but that had to have been a thrill because I remember the visual effects on Battlestar Galactica being just mind blowing at the time, for the time. Did you feel like you had to step up your game, or did you feel like you were ready for it? You're like,
Oh man.
I'm ready for this one.
That was man, that was like a master class coming in on that. So that was my actual first official production in LA. Um, so prior to that, um, I got to a point. So I was going through school, and excuse me, as I choke over here. But I didn't have anybody there in Michigan who was doing that kind of stuff. And I mean, I even had one guy that tell me, who he was going through law school at Michigan State, and he was like, he looked at me and he was like, "Well, somebody's got to do it." I was like, "Okay," but right around that time, Doug Drexler had started a blog, and somebody had pointed me to that, and I was like, "Okay." So I kind of started interacting with him, and I thought, well, maybe I should just ask him for, I don't want him to tell me exactly how to do it, but just kind of point me in the right direction. So I just said, "Hey, Doug, how does somebody get in contact with you off your blog?" And probably within 5 to 10 minutes of sending that, I got an email and it said, "Hey, Matt, Doug Drexler here. What's up?" And
Wow.
so, he and I kind of started interacting. That was probably back in 2008, 2009. And over the course of the next couple of years, he would start relating his experiences of working on Star Trek and working in Hollywood in general. And it would, I don't know, it would just inspire me to do things. And I would send stuff over to him and be like, "I don't know if you can use this or what do you think of this?" And he started using it on his blog. And so when they started doing prepping for Blood and Chrome, he was like, "Hey, Matt, we need somebody to come help out in this particular position. And I think maybe you'd enjoy that." And so, yeah, I packed up and from Michigan and came out here. And man, I'm telling you, that first day, I had a permagrin because I loved Battlestar Galactica, and I'm going in there and I'm looking at all these files that seeing scenes that they had done for that, and I was just like, "Oh my gosh, this is so cool! This is so cool!" And Gary Hutzel was my visual effects supervisor, and it's such a great experience. I mean, I learned so much from the artists there.
Mhm.
I've been very, very fortunate to have been able to work with some really, really cool people, and to learn from them. I mean, we're talking guys who worked on Deep Space Nine and Voyager, Babylon 5, um, you know, so it's been a great. I walked in there thinking I knew what I was doing, and then quickly being shown that I had no idea what I was doing. I nothing, Jon Snow. Um, and but yeah, it was great, and thankfully they were all very patient with me, and I was in a position to where I could learn.
Mm. Mm.
I'm noticing a theme because, uh, you know, we've heard stories of Michael Piller reaching out to writers and saying, "Hey, we're going to bring you on." And these are just, writers who just submit their scripts, like everyone else. But he actually reached out to people and followed up on those things. And, people have had their stories published because of it. And then we've heard stories of Gene Roddenberry kind of reaching out to people and tracking them down to say, "Hey, you were asking for an interview. Let me give you one."
Yeah.
Um, and now you're telling me that Doug Drexler responded to your request for contact and actually followed up and followed through. And so the theme that I'm noticing is that a lot of people in the Star Trek world, people of influence, people of power, are willing to extend themselves to other people and say, "Hey, I have opportunity for you." And even more so, they are also acknowledging that there's roles that they can't fill, that they'll bring other people in to fill in some roles that need to be filled. And I think that's one of the great things about Star Trek, how the family has grown, because it's not just about the people that are on the set who are originally a part of it. It's about the extended family who are brought in because of their love for the show, because of their connections with different people in the show. And I feel like that's how it has caused it to grow. And not only just grow, but grow in a way where it's growing with people who love it. It's not like you're recruited because, you don't have any other options in life and, hey, just why don't you do that? It's more like, this is my passion. I love this. I'll do it for free. I'll work with you for whatever you need. And those things kind of develop into, and I think that's one of the great stories of Star Trek, is how many people that it's brought
Yeah.
on board.
Including
I
yourself,
would
Matt.
100%. Well, yeah. Well, I don't know. Anytime I've interacted with anybody who's worked on the show before, like they've always been super gracious. They've been patient. But I think that's why, to me, that's part of the reason why Star Trek is such a success, is because everybody from the showrunners to the actors to the people behind the scenes, they all brought their A game to this thing, and it's that they love the show, and it shows. I mean, it just, like, I think that somehow whatever ingredients that are there, they pour that love into these episodes. And even on episodes that maybe don't resonate as well with fans as others, you can still see that artistry. You can still see that passion that the people behind the scenes had
Right.
for the just to be working on this. I mean, a lot of them were people who started off as fans of the original series, and now they're getting this opportunity to work on new Star Trek. And it's like, I don't know. I just am always very impressed when the opportunity to interact with those people. Um, I had the opportunity to work on the remastering of season 2 of Next Generation, and I found myself at one point sitting in the same room with Mike and Denise Okuda, Doug Drexler, Dan Curry, and then another gentleman by the name of David Takamura, he started off as a PA on Next Generation and then became a visual effects coordinator on Deep Space Nine and then Battlestar Galactica. But I'm just sitting there, and I'm sitting back and listening to them all talk about these experiences that they had the first time through working on the show, and I'm like, man, this is like, nobody pinch me, because I don't want to wake up from this, because this is so cool. I mean, to see names on a screen, and then to get to interact with those people, like with both you, Ryan, and Sirach. It's like, it's a very surreal thing, when you go from just this dude that was hanging out in Michigan, not sure where he was going to go with life, and now, just to find yourself in those situations where you're talking with and interacting with people who are just so very talented, very gracious, and just overall just great people.
Yeah, I can't imagine finding yourself in a room with Doug Drexler, the Akudas, Dan Curry, and you're just sitting there going like, it feels like that's the round table of visual effects and practical effects all kind of coming together. They've all been there, done that with everything, and they're people that inspired you as a child, before you knew it, and then when you did know who they were, you would keep following their career, and then suddenly their career path that you've been following for a decade or two presumably has now led them into the same room as you. It's got to be surreal.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, you fight those feelings of like, I don't know if I'm like worthy to be amongst these people, so I'm just gonna kind of hang back, you know. But yeah, what a cool thing, and what a fun ride it is,
Mm-hmm. Well, we only have a couple minutes left, but sorry, go ahead, Sirach.
Yeah, we reviewed this Next Generation episode not too long ago, where no one has gone before. And there was a visual effect in that episode when they were going beyond warp 10. And Matt, I think you said something about them reusing that same shot. What was that you were talking about?
So there was a game, it was a VCR interactive board game called the Klingon Challenge, and which I think I still own somewhere. But it's seriously, at the time, it was like the coolest game. And so they reused some of the footage that they had shot for Next Gen in that game, and that, like, going to warp effect was one of those things, because at some point the Enterprise like accelerates, and the timer starts counting down faster, and so they use that warp effect that was in that episode to like give you an indication, like, you're running out of time, you got to finish this game up. So
Okay.
That's fun. There was a game similar to that. It was just a Star Trek one where you put a tape in a VCR, And it was just kind of like, you know, I don't remember what it was about, but I just remember it was a novel idea of you're playing the game and it says, okay, play the next whatever thing. And there's like a clip from Star Trek that tells you what the next thing is. I don't remember how it all was incorporated or what the gameplay was, but I did not hear of this Klingon one. Sounds kind of exciting, but maybe we'll go back and play that soon. I don't think so.
You can find a VCR.
Yeah, I'm like, as soon as I was saying it, I was like, we're never going to find it. We're not going to have a VCR. There's not, I don't know what I'm talking about here. That's not going to happen. But it would be cool if Matt still has it. Do you still have it?
I still have it somewhere, yeah. And you know, I actually just went looking for it the other day, and somebody has uploaded the video to YouTube. I'll have to send you the link.
Oh, cool.
It's crazy. I mean, it's Bob O'Reilly there, you know, in full Klingon, but he's not Gowron, but he's a Klingon that's basically the premise of the story is that they're at a starbase, they're doing some repairs in which it's been required to like boil it down to a skeleton crew, and you, the players, are part of that skeleton crew. And then he basically steals the Enterprise and he's taking it back to the Klingon Empire because he wants to start a war because he thinks the Klingons are weak now and everything. But he's fantastic. Oh, he's so funny because he'll pop. It's like you're playing, you got this timer, and every now and then he'll pop in and he'll be like, "Stop." You know, the player that's moving now, and then he has some sort of interaction for them while you're moving around this board that looks like it's like a top-down view of the Enterprise D. You've got various rooms, and you've got these little cardboard tricorders with little cardboard isolinear chips that grant you access to be able to do certain things in the game. So, and the end goal is that you have to collect all 5 isolinear chips, and then you can go up these little spaces that they said the Jeffrey tubes up to the bridge. You got little tiles that you turn over on your turn, and one of them is that you've stunned him, and then if you're able to stun him, you win the game. But if you don't do it I think the game timer is an hour. If you don't do it before then there's this whole like sequence where the Enterprise gets destroyed. And I'll have to send it to you because it's very funny. Bob is in rare form in it.
Good old Bob O'Reilly.
Yeah, right. He's not Gowron.
He doesn't do anything at 9. Right, everything's at 10 with this guy. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, tell you what, Matt, this has been so cool. Speaking of 10s, this interview was a 10, and we really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule of making awesome sci-fi stuff to join us for Virtual TrekCon 4. By the way, that's got to be your design behind you, right? That you created.
Yeah, that's a shot that I did. I just did a quick.
Hang on 1 second. I'm going to spotlight that.
That's DS9, right? No.
Yeah, it's DS9
with the shuttlecraft too.
Yeah, a little runabout on the pad there.
Amazing. Anyway,
you taught me a lot right now. I didn't know about this whole 3-point lighting system, Doug, and I'm going to look more into that because I didn't realize it's how you guys do it. But yeah, man, thank you.
Oh, thank you guys. Appreciate it.
You know you're doing well when Sirach's taking notes like 15 times. He's going like, ooh, I got to check that out. I got to check that out. He's taking notes everywhere. I love it. Anyway, thanks so much, Matt Boardman, and everybody at home. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for hanging with us. And enjoy Virtual TrekCon 4.